Greetings, friends of liberty. When I survey English life over the last 40 years, one of the liveliest and most enjoyable provocateurs and troublemakers in all of London has been that rogue of all work, John Wilkes. Publisher, radical, alderman, essayist, soldier, sheriff, and even mayor in 1774. Quite a succession of positions, without even mentioning, of course, the great variety he's taken on top of, underneath, behind, and in front of many French, British, and Dutch ladies. In this last sense, his success here is admittedly even more striking, since he's been called the ugliest man in all of England, due to his prognathous physiognomy, his chin and jaw protruding, I would estimate, at least 6 inches from the vertical. But, as he himself has said, given his very considerable charm, with the average lady it only takes him half an hour to talk away his face. And why, exactly, should our John Wilkes receive the prize for being the greatest provocateur and troublemaker in all of London? 4 proofs. Firstly, he was a member of the Hellfire Club, also known as the Medmenham Monks, a highly ironical designation since these monks loved nothing more than to cast aspersions upon religion by dressing up as the Pope and then eating Holy Ghost pies, b. getting into churches and urinating in the baptismal fonts, and c. Wilkes himself once bringing to the club a large monkey, with horns attached to his head, a cape on his shoulders, and glowing daubs of phosphorus on his cheeks, which his drunken companions, not surprisingly, found extraordinarily amusing. Secondly, Wilkes, in his newspaper The North Briton, in 62, had written an article attacking King George III's judgment in signing the Treaty of Paris, saying that the king had lent his sacred name to the most odious measures, and the most unjustifiable public declarations from a throne ever renowned for truth, honor, and virtue. This statement caused him to be sued by the Crown, and general warrants issued for his arrest, but after being imprisoned in the Tower, the arrest was invalidated, given that Wilkes was a member of Parliament and thus possessed of parliamentary privilege. His opposition to general warrants and in favour of free speech won him much popular acclaim. And partly because of this, Wilkes became beloved throughout the American colonies. Thirdly, as acts of provocation, returning to England from dallying in France in 1768, he was consigned to spend the rest of his sentence remaining for obscene blasphemy in King's Bench Prison for 10 months. However, after a month, more and more of his supporters started regularly gathering in St. George's Field outside his prison, chanting such slogans as "Wilkes and Liberty," or "Damn the King, damn the government, damn the justices." Troops brought in to preserve order were pelted with stones. The Riot Act was read, and the troops fired upon the crowd, killing several and injuring a dozen. The city, over the next days, rioted at length, given that their hero was still in prison and given their sense of injustice and outrage at the deaths of his supporters. And fourthly, as acts of provocation and troublemaking, his role in the Middlesex election affair. In February, March, and April of 1769, he won each successive election to Parliament, the last by a ratio of about 4 votes to 1. And yet, Parliament cancelled each of his triumphs, giving the seat in the end to his opponents. And that, because he was an outlaw, having fled to France previously because of blasphemy and libel charges, and perhaps to avoid his debtors. In the end, although Wilkes did not retain his seat, the country was stirred to a long-lasting and productive debate as to whether Parliament had the right to expel a member elected by the people. Was that a democracy? Truly? I shall leave a further recounting of many provocations on his part to another day, and move instead to an examination of troublemakers found even in your own 21st century in the city of Hong Kong. Yes, we review today the extraordinary story of that individual who caused the Chinese Communist Party such a great deal of trouble, that entrepreneur, publisher, and freedom fighter Jimmy Lai. In Mark Clifford's The Troublemaker, How Jimmy Lai Became a Billionaire, Hong Kong's Richest Man, and China's Most Feared Critic, we see the extraordinary highs and lows of Jimmy's life and the intelligence and energy he displayed both in creating some of the greatest companies in Hong Kong's history and in fighting for its democracy against the increasing lawlessness and oppression of the CCP. Jimmy and CY, his twin sister, were born in mainland China in the city of Canton in December 1948, 1 year before Mao's communist takeover. When he was 4, his father abandoned his family to leave for Hong Kong about 75 miles away, predicting, as he held Jimmy in his arms, that he would do great things. One reason his father left was because the Communist Party had expropriated both his house and business. There was nothing left. Jimmy didn't enjoy school, didn't attend it regularly, and had to repeat a grade. Partly this was because his desire to make money emerged very early on. By the age of 6, when he was out in the streets gathering half-smoked cigarettes and combining them and re-rolling them as whole cigarettes, B, carrying luggage for travelers, and C, even learning calligraphy to make stylish posters for the authorities. Given that his mother was sometimes put into forced labor camps, Jimmy's earnings kept the family together. In 1961, age 12, our budding entrepreneur, understanding, like his father, that only Hong Kong could offer him real freedom, smuggled himself into Macau, and then, boarding a fishing vessel with 60 others packed in the hold, sailed to Hong Kong. How did Jimmy feel when he set foot in the Crown Colony? I know I have arrived at a world where life is worth living. I was a 12-year-old boy. I just had a close brush with hell. But once I set foot on the beach, I have grown into a man. For Jimmy, who loves food, the first breakfast he ever had in Hong Kong felt like food is actually freedom. I was so emotional about food that when the food was served and I ate the first bite, I stood up to eat it. I don't know why. It's like paying respect. Working feverishly in Hong Kong, just as he had in Canton, he started in sweater factories, learning every aspect of the trade. Sometimes, other workers would donate parts of their lunch to his lunch fund. And when he wasn't working, he was studying English. By age 21, Jimmy was a factory manager, and by 26, he wanted his own factory. And so he went to the bank, got a loan, bought one, and called it Comitex. And a Hong Kong legend was born. He immediately increased production by A, ensuring that each worker knew exactly what he was to do each day, using color-coded strips to simplify tasks. B, by raising prices on some products. And C, by encouraging a high level of trust with factory workers, understanding that close communication and cooperation is the most effective way to solve problems and speed up production. After 8 months of Comitex doing piecework, his first big break came when he snagged an order from retailer J.C. Penney for 27,000 sweaters in 5 styles. Jimmy added an extra half-pound of cotton to every dozen sweaters to give them more strength and a nicer hand feel, and J.C. Penney's customers loved the result. After that, Jimmy got even bigger orders from Canada's Chateau of Clothing and in 1975, and in many others. Constantly expanding Comitex and improving its ability to meet the needs of North American sweater manufacturers, Jimmy came in contact with people who helped him grow in other ways. One of those people was Kate Milken, the wife of fellow salesman Bill Milken. As Clifford says, Lai appeared so uncouth to the Milkens that it was almost as if he had been raised by wolves. Once Kate Milken asked if she could privately show him some table manners. He hadn't realized that he behaved boorishly. And given all the time he spent in restaurants, eating virtually everything on the menu, this advice was apropos. In addition, she introduced him to economics, showing him Friedrich Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, which he devoured, consuming even more books, and later meeting economists such as Milton Friedman, Gary Becker, and Stephen Chung. Jimmy traveled as a salesman all around the world. One time in a Paris hotel, a man asked him to carry his luggage. The ever-helpful Lai grinned and shrugged, then obliged, and pocketed the tip. The man was Woody Allen. He would also spend 2 to 3 weeks at a time in New York City, with its Manhattan garment district the brain center of U.S. textile manufacturing. Lai honed his sense for the latest fashion trends by talking to salesgirls at the counters of Macy's, Saks, and Bloomingdale's. By doing so, he could soon predict exactly what the customer wanted in the near future. Jimmy constantly made Comitex more efficient by, for example, A, first making lots of sweaters in white, and then, according to demand, dyeing them desired colors afterwards. B, by working closely with suppliers, speeding up every part of the production process. And C, by cutting delivery times by 90%, often by using airplanes to transport the sweaters. The result? Such success that Western sweater manufacturers appealed to their respective legislatures to get tariffs and quotas enacted for every type of sweater. How did Jimmy and Comitex respond? First, by utilizing his superior knowledge in making custom blends of sweaters of both artificial and cotton fabrics that evaded the quotas. Secondly, by buying the quotas of other companies and then turning around and renting those, making a killing. And thirdly, after eating at the fine dining establishment Giordano's on Manhattan's Gold Street, he decided to start a new retail clothing company called Giordano's, knowing that the growing prosperity of the Asian tigers, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and others, would mean lots of retail customers eager for his clothing. That worked so well that for many years, his return on equity for his company's stocks and investors was 34% annually. Jimmy, like many, believed that in the end China would open up, and indeed it was opening up economically and politically until about 2012. However, Britain's Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher, when in 1982 she visited Deng Xiaoping in Beijing, told Deng that he couldn't understand a city that ran on free market principles and whose people prized their liberty. Deng responded by hawking his throat and spitting into a spittoon. And when Hong Kong was turned over to China in 1997, the CCP promised that Hong Kong's freedoms and its free market would remain in place for 50 years after the Chinese takeover until 2047. Of course, like so many of the CCP's promises, it meant nothing at all. And after the massacre of hundreds in Tiananmen Square ordered by Deng Xiaoping on June 4, 1989, Jimmy became a formidable and outspoken opponent of the regime, in 1994 calling Premier Li Peng a national humiliation. That got the CCP's attention and a bullseye on his back. Constantly casting his entrepreneur eyes about for new businesses to start, Jimmy chose to create a Hong Kong weekly magazine called Next. Next was a fusion of gossip rag, like the National Enquirer on its outside pages, and serious political and economic commentary, like that found in the Wall Street Journal, on the inside. But where other Hong Kong periodicals were afraid to confront Beijing, Jimmy had no such qualms, over and over again exposing its oppressive actions. In addition, his path-breaking early expose of a new type of contagious disease, which turned out to be SARS, helped save many lives in 2003. The city loved Next, buying 200,000 plus copies per week. Jimmy next thought, why not start a daily? And so he did in June 1995. It was called Apple Daily. Its slogan, an apple a day, keeps the liars away. Apple Daily followed the formula of Next, just doing it in broadsheet tabloid form. Paparazzi, sex scandals, half-naked starlets, even reviews of red-light brothels and individual ladies of the night. All in color too, which cost more, but which also allowed him to charge more for full-color ads. Apple Daily and Jimmy fought the CCP's betrayal and violation of its 1997 treaty with Britain, which stipulated that Hong Kong remain free until 2047 in the following ways. A, by opposing in 2003 the proposed Article 23 legislation, which would have regarded as treasonous much normal citizen behavior. 500,000 people came out to support the opposition, the movement helped by Jimmy, and the legislation being withdrawn, although it finally passed 21 years later in 2024 by a rubber-stamped pro-Beijing legislature. B, Apple Daily provided extensive and serious coverage of the 2014 umbrella protests, it gaining the admiration of many Hong Kongers who previously had disliked it as a mere scandal sheet. C, Jimmy, by sitting every day with the protesters in 2014 and having 3 men dump pig intestines on him, and also contributing hundreds of thousands of his own dollars to the organizing of the protests. D, in 2019, Jimmy mobilized the paper to fight a CCP-sponsored extradition bill, which, if passed, would have moved all criminal trials of Hong Kong residents to the mainland. In the subsequent weeks, over 1 million people took to the streets to protest this attempted legal outrage. And when students started vandalizing public property, Jimmy and Apple Daily didn't scold them, partly because the government had recruited gangsters to fight and beat up the students. E, Jimmy was then booked on criminal intimidation charges, merely because he yelled at the reporter of a pro-Beijing newspaper during a protest. They also later booked him on additional bogus charges like illegally taking part in rallies and for simply lighting a candle on June 4th, 2019, in remembrance of the students who had died at Tiananmen Square 30 years ago. F, Apple Daily and Next were finally shut down by the Beijing-compliant Hong Kong police in June 2021. One of the biggest changes to Jimmy's later life is his conversion to Catholicism. His second wife, Teresa, being a Catholic, Jimmy gradually became acclimated to the religion and converted in 1997. This was 8 years after he had first met her in 1989. Catholicism, incidentally, has a significant influence in Hong Kong, even though the city is only 5% Catholic, since it has 242 Catholic schools and over 136,000 pupils. New York City, with 1 million more people in 2023, had only about 60% as many schools, 148, with 50,000 students. The Catholic school graduates proved to be a potent element of resistance in the struggle to maintain Hong Kong's freedoms. In 2020, Jimmy was finally imprisoned. Not surprising, among other things, given the reaction that the CCP officialdom had to Jimmy having displayed in all his stores a copy of the famous Lady of Liberty statue first shown on Tiananmen Square. He is now, with his additional bogus conviction of December 2025, in which he was brought to court shackled and in a cage, spent over 1,800 days in Stanley Prison for doing nothing criminal, the majority of that time in solitary confinement. He's allowed to read only 6 books per month and forbidden to receive the many hundreds of postcards that Catholic children send him. He has chosen, among others, from his book allowance, G.K. Chesterton's In Defense of Sanity and the collected works of St. John of the Cross. He also sketches and draws extensively on religious themes, such as of the Virgin Mary or Christ on the cross. His Catholicism has also impacted his life in that, being a naturally assertive and at times proud person, which is utterly justifiable, he has struggled reconciling these normal healthy feelings with the prescribed Catholic levels of humility. In conclusion, I'd give this bio an A-. It superbly showcases the life and times of one of the extraordinary entrepreneurs and freedom fighters of this century, a man who has the courage to withstand the torture of solitary confinement against the might of the brutal dictatorship of Xi Jinping's genocidal China. In the person of Jimmy, we see the greatness of Hong Kong and of a man who, penniless and without a father, by his own intelligence, knowledge, and hard work, created enormously productive businesses while at the same time retaining all his political and moral integrity. As Jimmy said when asked why he didn't escape and live in any of the many international cities in which he owns residences, he replied, "No, I could not leave. Otherwise, I could not raise my head and walk tall again. I must face the consequences of my actions, just or unjust. It is also a way to uphold the dignity of the Hong Kong people as one of the leaders for the fight for freedom. Also, if I shirk my responsibility and run away, I will be setting a very bad example for my children." If only the present president of the United States had 5% of Jimmy's integrity, the U.S. would be in good hands indeed. I bid you well, and remain the Scarlet Pimpernel.